And welcome back to Face the Nation. We're here with former presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders. Senator, I want to start with millennial voters. They represent now about 30% of the voting age population. That's about the size of baby boomers. That was a group you were very strong with. Hillary Clinton is having trouble with that group of voters. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure, but I think the antidote is that she has got to make it clear to not only the millennials, but every American, the difference that she has, not just on personality issues, which is what the media focuses on, but the real issues impacting the middle class and working families of this country. When you talk about the economy, Donald Trump wants to give hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country. Clinton understands that at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, the people on top are going to have to start paying their fair share of taxes. John, young people are very concerned, appropriately so, about the crisis regarding climate change. Clinton has a pretty strong program which says we have got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energies like wind and solar. Do you know what Donald Trump's position is on climate change? He thinks it's a hoax, and that is really frightening for the future of this planet. One more really important issue that I think has got to be talked about a whole lot. Clinton has said that she will appoint Supreme Court justices, nominate Supreme Court justices, who will overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which allows people like Sheldon Adelson last week to put $45 million into the political process to buy elections. Billionaires should not be buying elections. Clinton wants to stop that. Trump will appoint more conservatives to the Supreme Court. In terms of the issue of bigotry, and the younger people are more than any generation, I think, John, in American history, are sick and tired of discrimination and racism. On that issue, I think the points of view of Clinton and Trump are pretty clear. Trump is running his campaign. The cornerstone of his campaign is bigotry, is dividing us up. That is certainly very different from what Clinton believes. So I think if she focuses on the issues, she will do just really well with the American people and certainly with younger people.
One of the things that voters who supported you are wary about and on the lookout for, you mentioned climate change, and there is some reporting done by Climate Change News. They looked at what Hillary Clinton and how she has talked about energy issues and climate issues, and since her challenge, her back and forth with you in the Democratic nominating process, it seems that the phrase climate change, according to this report, has dropped out of her speeches. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I honestly don't know the answer to that. What I can tell you is that recent reports have indicated that the situation, the scientists are telling us that the situation is even more dire than we had previously thought. In terms of Donald Trump, and I hope everybody understands this, despite what the entire scientific community is telling us about what a threat it is to this planet, climate change is, Donald Trump thinks it's a hoax. Clinton does have a serious proposal to invest in sustainable energy and in energy efficiency. I hope that Secretary Clinton will talk more about this issue, contrast her views with Trump's, because it is an enormously important issue.
When I talk to some of these voters who are undecided, what I hear from them is they say they don't like Donald Trump, but they don't think Hillary Clinton is going to be trustworthy, and so they say they're going to vote for either Gary Johnson or Jill Stein. And there's a poll that shows 44% of millennials, here I'm talking about them again, are voting for a third-party candidate. As an independent, why shouldn't they go vote for somebody who's close to what they believe if they don't like the two major party candidates?
Well, I will tell you why. And look, you know, I am the longest serving independent in the history of Congress. When I was younger, I ran on a third party here in the state of Vermont. I got all of 1% in one election. So I'm not here to disparage third party candidates who historically have played a very, very important role in this country in raising issues and moving this country in certain directions. But I think right now, given the crises that we face, a disappearing middle class, massive levels of income and wealth inequality, the issue of the increase in bigotry that we are seeing, climate change, the fact that so many young people are leaving school deeply in debt. We got hundreds of thousands of bright young kids who can't even afford to go to college. I think what the focus has got to be on now is understanding that this moment in history for a presidential election is not the time for a protest vote. It is a time to look at which candidate is going to work best for the middle class and working families. In terms of higher education, I work with Secretary Clinton. She now has a proposal that says that for every family in this country of $125,000 or less, 83% of our population, public colleges and universities will be tuition-free for those kids. That's a big deal.
Let me ask you one last question, Senator. The Wall Street Journal recently reported that Senate liberals like Elizabeth Warren were working on a list of names of people from places like Morgan Stanley or BlackRock that they would actively oppose if they were put into a Clinton administration. Will you join in that effort?
Absolutely. We certainly have seen under Democratic and Republican administrations what Wall Street CEOs have done to our economy. We don't need more Wall Street CEOs in any administration. We need people in the administration who will stand with working families and the middle class. And I will do everything that I can to see that those are the people appointed in a Clinton administration.
All right, Senator Bernie Sanders, thanks so much for being with us again.
Thank you, John.
And now we turn to CBS News Director of Elections, Anthony Salvanto. Welcome back. Anthony, the polls are tightening. Why are they tightening?
Yeah, the big picture is that big lead that we saw Hillary Clinton open up over the summer has now shrunk back to what is at best a narrow lead. And, you know, some of these states that I think the Clinton, we'd seen those big leads have come back, like Colorado. It's really instructive. The biggest reason across all of it is enthusiasm. From her voters, that's a little bit on the wane. And what ends up happening is you see key groups, like you mentioned, those younger voters. They're not as excited. They're not as enthusiastic for her. They're moving a little bit even into that undecided or won't vote category or to third parties. She's got to get that excitement back up. Because remember, the polls don't just tell you about vote choice. They tell you about who's likely to show up. And if they say they're not as likely to show up, numbers go down.
So let's pause on that for just a moment. So because we're going to be beneath a blizzard of polls between now and the end, how should people think about these kinds of movements? I mean, so some people are moving away from Hillary Clinton. What happens to them? Are those people available for Donald Trump, or how should people think about the movements in the polls? It's not just a person saying, I want Trump or Clinton, that's it.
Exactly. You know, where everybody's going to talk about swing voters from here to Election Day. Don't assume every movement in a poll is about a swing voter. What ends up happening is people will either become less enthusiastic about voting, and then polls will sort of discount whether they're likely to show up, and then people sometimes park themselves in unsure for a while, especially if they're partisans, but then they come back, most of them, to their partisan choice. So you see that movement. It's not, and especially this year, we see very, very few people actually going, oh, I'm for Clinton this week, Trump this week, back to Clinton. We're just not seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, there's a whole garage full of people parking in unsure. Let's go now to the question of national versus state. So we get some national polls that say one thing, and then state polls that say another. How should people think through those?
Right. The poll watcher's guide to this is first watch the states. Obviously, that's what matters. This is a state-by-state election. You have to win in the Electoral College. What you also get out of states is much more detail about that voter turnout, because you can see particular groups, whether it's young voters or whether it's older voters, and you know those numbers in those states. National polls, think of them like that weather vane on top of the barn. You can see which way the wind is blowing, but what you really need is a much more detailed forecast, and that you get out of the states.
So, it's more important for the purposes of a campaign that we know how African Americans in, say, Pennsylvania are going to behave than the general national picture about African Americans, right?
Well, exactly. And, you know, sometimes when you see movement in the national polls, the trouble is you don't know where it's coming from. So it might be coming from a key state like Pennsylvania, but it could just as well be coming from a California or Texas, where we know what's going to happen anyway.
In advance of the debates, the Clinton team is pushing the idea that Donald Trump is too risky to be president. You had some interesting findings there about this idea of risk in Donald Trump. Explain that.
Right. Well, both candidates, to some extent, are described as risky among a number of other descriptions that voters use. Trump in particular, but you notice even his voters say that he is risky. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing for them. And the reason is they want change. They want change, political change and cultural change and economic change. So they're willing to tolerate some risk in order to get the change that they want.
What does the Battleground Tracker say about what people are looking for in this debate that's happening tomorrow night?
Well, remember, partisans are looking, they say, just to see their candidate win. So there's already that large group that's locked in. They're going to think what they're going to think no matter what. The other thing, remember, the economy. That's the number one thing that voters say they're looking for. And you get this sense that, especially given two candidates with high unfavorables, the winner of this debate isn't going to be the one with the best zinger. It's going to be the one that looks in that camera and can start to assuage some of that voter anxiety about the economy, maybe even about the candidates themselves.
About 20 seconds left. How much do debates matter in the end?
Some, not a lot. What we often see out of a debate is some movement like we described, maybe some lack of enthusiasm, maybe a boost of enthusiasm, but then things seem to switch back a little bit. It's not as dramatic as you think.
All right, Anthony, we'll look forward to having you back. And we'll be right back with a man who knows a little something about presidential debates. Stay with us. And we're delighted to be back with Bob Schieffer, who moderated presidential debates in the last 3 elections. Bob, it's great to be here with you. I'm so happy you're here. Okay, so you've done this before, and it would be about 24 hours before the debate. What would you be thinking if you were in this spot?
I think I'd be under the bed, hoping they couldn't find me. I tell you, John, people don't believe me sometimes when I say I don't get nervous on TV, but I've done it so long, it's second nature. But in 2004, when I did my first presidential debate, I was getting ready to go out on the stage, and I looked down, and I was shaking like a leaf. I mean, I hadn't had stage fright, I bet, in 20 years. But this is unlike anything any of us involved in journalism have ever done. And when you think of all those people out there, I mean, you're talking about a Super Bowl-sized crowd, and this one may set a record.
And as a moderator, working the refs has become a full-time occupation of both campaigns and of social media. And I mean, it's a one. Of course, you'd be under the bed. Everybody's coming to get you.
My advice to the moderators is think of it this way: no matter how mean they are, no matter what they're saying about you on social media, every quarterback that loses today in the NFL, they're going to say worse things about him. So welcome to the NFL. This is just kind of how it is.
So how is it now? There's been a big question about fact-checking and what the moderator's role should be in that. How do you see that question?
Well, and I've said, and I've thought about this over the years after doing these things, the first fact checkers have to be the candidates themselves. If one candidate makes a mistake, you want to give the other person a chance to call him out on that. If he or she doesn't, then the moderator steps in and sets the record straight. But if you don't give the candidates themselves that opportunity, you're being unfair to both of them.
You have a theory that I love about letting the candidates talk. I mean, getting out of the way.
Well, these debates are about more than just the issues, as it were. Yes, issues are important. Yes, party is important. But what these debates are about are who are these people? Do they have the right stuff? Do they have the grace under pressure? This is a pretty tough job, no matter what anybody says. It's a pretty tough job. And I think the role of the moderator is to give people a more complete picture, if you can, of who these two people actually are.
What do you make of the strategies? There's a lot of talk about what each of these two are going to do. I've certainly asked the candidates, surrogates about it a lot. What do you make of this talking about what they're going to do before they do it?
Well, I think they're talking too much. I mean, let's think about this. I mean, Hillary Clinton's campaign is talking about, she's going to try to come up with these one-liners. She's going to try to throw him off. Well, if that is a strategy, fine. I think it's a good strategy. Why would you tell somebody about it? It's like saying, I'm going to tell a joke. Here's the punchline. Now here's the joke. You're not going to get much of a laugh if that's your strategy in telling jokes. I think they should be quiet about that. And I think too many times it's these advisors that are trying to show people in the media how smart they are. They ought to let the candidate be the one that people are focusing on. And I want to say one other thing. John, this idea of putting hecklers in the audience, I mean, Hillary Clinton's talking about putting Mark Cuban in the audience. He's a guy who's been very critical of Trump to try to throw him off, and then, of course, comes back and said, well, I'm going to invite Jennifer Flowers, who's Bill Clinton's old girlfriend. I'm really pleased to know that the Trump campaign this morning said Jennifer Flowers will not be there. Those kinds of things are beneath the dignity of the office that these two people are running for. I think they both would do well to think about that.
Bob, I'm going to end it there. Any other question wouldn't be any good after that. Thanks so much, Bob.
Thank you for having me, John. Really enjoyed it.
And we'll be right back with our panel. Joining us now are Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today, and Ed O'Keefe of the Washington Post. Welcome to both of you. Before we dive into the debates, Susan Page, let's just set the table for everybody. Where is this campaign right now as you see it?
So when you look at all these polls, you don't want to be transfixed by the particular numbers. You want to look at the trend. And it is pretty clear that the trend has been to a tighter race both nationally and in some of these swing states. And it's in part because Trump has succeeded to a remarkable degree in consolidating the support of Republicans, as we saw with one of his fiercest rivals, Texas Senator Ted Cruz this week, while Hillary Clinton is struggling a bit to get the enthusiasm of the voters who elected Barack Obama twice are not quite as enthusiastic about her.
You see it that way too, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, just the consolidation that Trump has seen, I think, is remarkable and a testament to the fact that he has been so much more disciplined in the last few weeks. I think the threats that were made by Republican leaders like Speaker Ryan to, we will abandon you if you don't start shipping up and shaping up, were heard. And he has certainly not done or said anything terribly new that's controversial. A lot of what we've heard has been heard before, and Republicans seem to be okay with that. I thought the 7-point explanation from Senator Cruz as to why he wants to support him speaks to what a lot of Republicans feel at this point, that while they may not like him, they're more concerned about making sure the conservatives serve on the Supreme Court, that the future of Obamacare is determined by Republicans and not by Democrats, and that somebody new step in to deal with all the problems around the world. And, for a lot of Republicans at this point, he's tolerable enough, and they're willing to back him.
Susan, there was also maybe a little politics in Ted Cruz's decision to finally get on board with the Republican nominee. Reince Priebus on this show last week threw a little brushback pitch to Republicans saying, if you don't support the nominee now whether that moved Ted Cruz, he's thinking about his future, too.
I'm not sure Reince Priebus did, but, I think Mike McCall might have, the Texas congressman, chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, who's been talking about how terrible it is that Ted Cruz hadn't endorsed Donald Trump, and who, by the way, just might be interested in challenging him in a Republican primary in 2018. That might have had something to do about it. One thing interesting, Ted Cruz endorsed Donald Trump, but he was at an event sponsored by the Texas Tribune yesterday, refused to answer whether Donald Trump was fit to be president.
That's right. And speaking of fitness to be president, that's his big hurdle in the debate, isn't it, Ed?
It is. If you look at the numbers, there's less of an expectation that he will emerge victorious and perform well than there is for Hillary Clinton, which brings great concern to the Brooklyn headquarters of the Clinton campaign, because they're trying to keep the goalposts the same distance apart and the expectations about equal. There's big concern that if she is seen as supposing to having to perform much better, and she doesn't, that then he's going to be seen as having won this thing. And that's why you saw Senator Kaine, and you've seen so many of her other surrogates and top aides in the last few days saying, remember, this guy is a liar. He has lied repeatedly. And if you and the press don't call him out for it, it's an unfair advantage to him, and it's going to hurt her chances. And I think that's pretty remarkable, that they're really quite aggressively trying to go after that and remind people ahead of this that he's been known to tell tall tales, and they expect him to do it again tomorrow night.
Or if he doesn't do it on debate night, to remind people that he has this other part of his character. Exactly. And not let them think the man on the stage is the only person. That seems to be part of their strategy. Susan, what do you think of what Hillary Clinton has to do? Expectations, if you look at the history of debates, are so much a part of why a line wins or a person is declared the winner. It almost has nothing to do with what actually happens on stage, but everything that is part of the narrative beforehand.
Expectation is part of it. There's a lot of talk that Hillary Clinton needs to show that she's likable. I'm not sure that's her biggest challenge. I think her biggest challenge is to show that she is an agent of change in an election where people really want some change. I don't think that Donald Trump is doing better and is now competitive in this presidential race because people like him so much. I think that it's because they believe that in the things that they worry about in this country, that he's likely to shake things up. And if you're concerned that things are really heading in the wrong direction, that might be just enough to get you to support him. So I think her challenge is to show that while she's very supportive of Barack Obama and he's a big supporter of hers, that she recognizes there are problems in this country that need maybe fresh approaches and a lot of energy in addressing.
And it does seem that both the Clinton campaign and certainly some of the people who are advisors or who would like to be listened to are saying what Susan's saying, which is people need a reason to vote for you, not so much to be terrified about Donald Trump, which is difficult because, of course, if on the one hand you're trying to remind voters about another Donald Trump different from the one who might appear on the debate stage, at the same time you're trying to show that you've got solutions too. That's a tricky thing to pull off in 90-second answers under the hot lights and millions watching.
It is also when you expect that he will probably try to throw back at her repeatedly concerns about her use of email. This is a debate that's supposed to be somewhat about security and foreign policy. She was involved in that for 4 years, and one of his most valid lines of attack has been, you were involved in crafting the Obama administration's foreign policy. How do you respond to what's going on? Undoubtedly that comes up, and she'll have to address that as well. So it should prove difficult. I just wonder throughout all of these conversations about it, how big an audience really will we see? The number to beat in this country, at least, is about 115 million and change for Super Bowl 49. Will we see more than that tune in tomorrow night? I'm dubious, frankly, that given how displeased Americans are by all this, that they're all going to sit there and really want to put up with it for 90 minutes. But if they do, incredible that they're willing and eager to see it. And what I find most interesting, we have a poll out this morning, only about 17% of registered voters say that this thing could change their mind. And of that, 6% say it actually could play a very big role in changing their mind. So in reality, even if 100 million people show up, you're only looking at, a few thousand people who could be persuaded by this spectacle.
We found that basically people deepen their strength for one candidate, whichever one they supported coming into that. Susan, let's talk a little bit about the way actually debates happen, though, here in our last minute or so. There's a lot of social media chatter that happens beforehand. In an analysis of the last campaign, there were some reporters on Twitter who basically determined the debate in the first 15 minutes. The candidates are kind of preparing for that.
Yeah. The other thing is, those of us who have print deadlines, I know we're a vanishing breed, have deadlines, right? So we're really forced to pay attention to those opening minutes, the first exchange or two in writing our own stories. That opening matters a lot, and it matters in holding people in the debate as well. This is going to be analyzed and overanalyzed, and there's going to be some 90-second exchange that will become viral and be played over and over again. And I think what we also need to look at is not just the 90-second exchange, it's the 90 minutes of the debate, because the degree to which debates actually test presidential qualities, you need to look at the kind of stamina and thoughtfulness, the ability to deal with a lot of issues that you get over 90 minutes, which is a really long period of time.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks so much, Susan. Ed, thank you, and we'll be right back. As we say goodbye today, we want to wish a fond farewell and Godspeed to our friend Charles Osgood and say hello to Jane Pauley, the new anchor of CBS Sunday Morning. As for us, we won't be here next week, but the NFL will be. We'll see you in 2 weeks from Washington University in St. Louis. That's on the morning of the second presidential debate. For Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.